What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome again to the Monday edition of Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. So if that's you, if you are a non-Catholic, maybe you were a Catholic when you were a kid, maybe you've never been a Catholic, but you've got some questions about the Catholic faith, this is a great show to get those questions answered. Here's our number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're calling from outside North America, please dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. You can also send text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Message and data rates may apply. There we go. Okay. You can also email the show if you wish, ctc@ewtn.com. Always like hearing from everybody in any way that you can join us. Michael Birchfield, back from his brief sojourn to the left coast, is now our producer back in the chair here. Also, Ryan Penny is our phone screener. Jeff Burson is on social media, which means you can also post a question via YouTube or Facebook. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
Doing very well. How was your weekend?
It was a weekend, which means it was thick with family duties and obligations and running around and cookings and various cleanings and carpoolings, and it was heavy on the activity side, light on the rest side.
Yeah, well, there's always next weekend, right?
Actually, next week I'm traveling to Indiana.
Are
for
you?
Tri-State Catholic Radio.
Oh, fantastic.
So it'll be a different kind of work.
It'll be fun. It'll be
a
isn't
relaxing plane ride.
There you go. Go with that. Here's an email we received from Jeff, who says, could you please discuss women's roles in the church and give some resources for further study? I ask because my niece is questioning the lack of women leadership in the church, and none of my answers have been sufficient for her. Thanks for all you do, Jeff.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I think that someone who asserts that women don't have many leadership roles in the Catholic Church has not spent much time in the Catholic Church, because my experience, quite honestly, is almost all the leadership roles in the Catholic Church are held by women. The exception would be the roles that are reserved for clerical governance.
Yeah.
Right. So in terms of running the parish or the diocese, the bishop, of course, is the governor of the diocese. And
Sure.
Priests have ultimate responsibility for the governance of the church. I mean, of the parish church, right? But in the sacraments. But there's a lot that goes on in Catholic life.
Oh, yeah.
that doesn't fall within the specific rubrics of the celebration of the sacraments, or deciding which priest serves where, and overseeing questions of doctrine and morals and so forth. The machinery, the bureaucracy of running the Catholic Church is, almost, in my experience, is overwhelmingly women. So I work in the Catholic diocese, and my wife said to me just the other day, she said, David, you ever feel kind of odd walking in the door at work, being like the odd guy out when there's women all over the place? And I'm talking about positions of serious leadership, right? So, in the tribunal, which is the church's court that looks at anything that could come up in canon law, we have canonists who are women. We have school superintendents and principals that are women. When it comes to administering the work of Catholic education in the parish, I go to conferences and meetings put on for catechists, and the DREs, the Director of Religious Education in the parish. My goodness, you'd feel like an odd bird if you were a guy in that job. It's like women everywhere. School teachers, women. I have met women who have come from extremely high-powered, enormously well-paid corporate jobs, corporate management, executive leadership, who have then taken those skills and gone to work for the Catholic Church. And when they jump in at the level of diocesan administration, and I've talked to some women like this, it's very much roll up the shirt sleeves and go, "Oh my gosh, somebody needs to get in here and clean up this mess." Thank goodness, we're on the job. And they use those skills, lawyers, doctors, accountants, you name it. There's hardly a field of human endeavor, musicians, where women are not leading the charge in Catholic ministry. And I've got some friends, who I'm talking about, who grew up in Cuba, and their mother was the parish secretary for their parish church in Cuba, and kind of jokingly they said, "Yeah, the priest, he couldn't do anything without my mother's permission." She literally ran the administrative day in, day out work of the parish. And no, Father, you have to be here at this time and there at that time, and these people are waiting for you over here. And I'm sitting in an institution right now, largest religious broadcaster in the world, I think, run very effectively and ambitiously and entrepreneurially by one of the most effective female Catholic leaders, clearly in the American church, the international church of the 20th century.
Mother Angelica.
So
absolutely.
I look around.
The leadership roles are definitely there.
You better believe it.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much for your question. Here's one now from John checking us out on YouTube. Is there a Catholic order in which to read the books of the Bible? Where should I start?
That's a good question. So there's a canonical order, all right, and if you just go to the USCCB website, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and look up Bible, or any Catholic Bible is going to give you the canonical order. The only variation is sometimes the Book of Maccabees is stuck at the end of the canon, and other times it's stuck in the middle of the historical books, and that's. But it doesn't really matter, because in genre, the books of the Bible are essentially historical narrative, the wisdom literature and poetical books, and then the prophetic literature, and so they're not lined up perfectly chronologically, because you'll get historical books that are dealing with, say, the age of Isaiah, and then you'll skip through a whole bunch of wisdom literature, and then you finally get to Isaiah, and so you kind of have to read backwards to line it up. I have seen study tools before that actually arrange biblical texts in chronological order.
Yeah,
it's very artificial.
Because
you got to stick a bunch of psalms into the Davidic kingdom. But you could do it that way.
Okay.
Read the Old Testament before the New. Read the Old Testament in light of the New.
Sounds
Read
good.
the Gospels.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk with Xavier in Pennsylvania, JD in Amarillo, Texas, and we've got a line open for you at 833-288-EWTN here on Call to Communion. Hey, tonight on EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn, the Supreme Court kicks off its term with an empty seat on the bench. News Nightly will have all the latest on that. Plus, a 3-week meeting begins Wednesday at the Vatican News Nightly will let you know who is coming for the very first time. Check it out tonight, EWTN's News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn at 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN. And if you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Xavier in Blooming Valley, Pennsylvania, listening today on the Station of the Cross. Hello, Xavier. What's on your mind today?
Hello. Give you a little bit of background to start off with. I'm 18 years old, and I'm going to be converting in the spring. And I still go to my parents' Protestant church, and my pastor and I are going to discuss the early history of the church and how different things came about, like, I don't know, confession. I'm guessing we'll be in it, the canonization of Scripture. And I don't know a whole lot about that, and I was just wondering if you have any good resources that can inform me about those.
Sure, I sure do. Quite a lot, actually. You might start with a good general history of the Catholic Church, and there's one that's very approachable by James Hitchcock called The History of the Catholic Church, and it's basically the 2,000-year history of the Church.
Mm-hmm.
There is a book that is a description of early Christian doctrine. It's not by a Catholic, but I think it is. It's very historically useful. The author is J.N.D. Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, and the book is simply called Early Christian Doctrine. Another one also very approachable, edited and written by Jimmy Akin, A-K-I-N, called The Fathers Know Best, an essential guide to the teachings of the Church Fathers. And then there are a number of books written and edited by Mike Aquilina, all of which are either collections of or commentary upon the writings of the early Church Fathers.
Yeah.
I would, if I knew that I was going to get into a conversation with a Protestant pastor, and his goal is going to be to persuade you not to become Catholic. That's his objective. Spend some time on the Called to Communion website, calledtocommunion.com. And just poke around, and you can read about the Church Fathers, and you can read about Reformed and Catholic, or Protestant and Catholic dialogue and theological issues. You can search for some of the stuff I've written on that particular website.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's not hard for somebody that has graduate degrees in theology to mess with an 18-year-old. No offense, all right? Just because somebody who's, 40 or 50 years old and has been reading theology from a particular point of view for his whole life has spent a lot of time working up arguments to defend his position. And a good debater is going to know the weak points in the other side's position better than the other side is going to know.
Sure.
And so I want to prepare you intellectually with the tools that you have, but expect that he'll raise some question you don't have an answer for, just because he's been doing this a lot longer than you have. But here's what I want you to do. When that happens, if he says, well, what are you going to do about X? Or how do you answer Y? Or what's your response to Z? It is okay to say, I don't have an answer for that right now, but that's not a good reason to in a knee-jerk way, in a reactionary way, accept your explanation, right? I don't know the answer to your question. I'm going to go ask people who do, or I'm going to do some research and I'm going to come back to you. So at some point, if you feel like you've been stumped, that doesn't mean you have to capitulate. Instead, you could come back. You can call me. You can call John Martinoni. You can call anybody, open line.
Catholic Answers.
You can call Catholic Answers.
Sure.
Call Colin Donovan. Call Father Mitch. Do some work on your own, read some books, and think through and go back to it. So this is going to be an ongoing question for you as you seek to understand your faith better, grow in the knowledge of Christian doctrine and church history, and so I'd look at questions that you don't have an answer for right now as occasions for further study rather than for moments of panic.
Absolutely. Xavier, thank you so much for your very thoughtful call. We do appreciate that. And that opens up a line for you right now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's Called to Communion here on this Monday afternoon on EWTN. Got a text just now from Joe in Elmira, New York, who says, what is the church's stance on marijuana? I have never experimented with it, but I was wondering, since it is a naturally found plant, and also why would alcohol be okay, but not marijuana? Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. So, the sacred scriptures teach that it is wrong to become intoxicated, regardless of the substance upon
How
which
you got there.
and if you're intoxicating yourself, that's wrong. So
Mhm.
there's divine law on that, but there's also natural law on that. There's also law that we can discern from reason. One big difference between Catholic tradition and say some Protestant denominations is that for Catholic, sin is not simply breaking a written commandment given to us in the Bible. Sin is any inordinate act that is against reason. All right? And you can sin against God, you can sin against your neighbor, and you can also sin against yourself. So it would be against reason and bad for me to take up a sledgehammer and hit myself repeatedly in the head. Even if I got kicks out of it, that'd be wrong. But it would, in fact, be sinful. I'd be sinning against myself because I'd be harming and damaging myself.
Sure.
And I have a moral obligation to do good and avoid evil, and that includes my own good.
Mhm.
I don't think there's a lot of controversy over the fact that, number one, impairing my intellectual faculties, all other things being equal, just intentionally impairing my intellectual faculties, which there's no doubt that marijuana has that effect, is diminishing my highest and most noble human attribute, namely my intellect. So that's just bad on the face of it. And I've been around a lot of marijuana users in my life, and I remember there's a wonderful anti-marijuana drug ad I saw years ago. Kid's walking down the stairs in his house, and he says, my brother was never a burglar, he wasn't a murderer, he wasn't a rapist, he hadn't done this bad thing or that bad thing. In fact, he's never done much of anything. And you get to the bottom of the stairs and you turn and look, and there's his young adult brother just stoned out of his brains on the couch. Do you want to be the kind of guy who gets to the end of his life, you're 80 years old if you make it that far, and you look back over your life and you think, wow, I binge watched every show on Netflix for 45 years, and those pizzas really tasted good, when I had the munchies. But you know what? They taste less and less good. And that's another thing about the use of marijuana or any drug that has, dopaminergic or opioid effects, is that the pleasure response gets blunted more and more and more over time.
Dulled,
How many
yeah.
times have you seen a stoner or a druggie who has some natural pleasure? Talk about natural plants, a mountainside or a music concert or the pizza, and his response is, man, this would be so good if we were high. They lose the capacity to enjoy life.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they just need the drug to maintain a maintenance level of, seeming subjective goodwill. It's just really bad for you. And if you do it in adolescence and early adulthood, it measurably, permanently diminishes your intellect.
Brain's still forming.
Brain's still forming. It makes you lazy, selfish, brutish, fat, bored, boring, and stupid. All right? You don't even have to look at the Bible to know it's not good for you. It's not good for you.
Yeah. Joe, thank you so much for your text. We hope that's helpful for you. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN.
Oh, and why is alcohol okay? That's the other question he asked,
Yeah.
okay? Well, alcohol is not, without qualification, okay. The more you drink, the worse off you are. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah.
All right. And Scripture admonishes us to moderate our use of alcohol consistent with the end of human well-being and health. And when you look at Catholic tradition on this question, not only do Catholics recognize the sin of gluttony and drunkenness as real sins, all right, and is extremely destructive to the contemplative life, which is the ultimate end of the human person, but especially within the tradition of the religious life, all right, and the monastic life and the ascetical life, there are many counsels to moderate the use of alcohol or avoid it altogether in view of those greater goods of contemplation that we're seeking. To take one example, the Benedictine Rule, which was, by the standards of the day, was pretty liberal, but by today's standards would be fairly parsimonious and seen as restrictive. Benedictines were to eat a primarily vegetarian diet, stay away from meat, and luxuries, and to make moderate use of alcohol in a culture and a time in which there weren't a lot of options for hydration,
Yeah.
and water's not always clean, and and even then, St. Benedict says, look, if you need this for health or whatever, you can have a little bit. He put a daily limit on the amount of alcohol you can consume, but counseled, if you can do without it, do without it.
Okay. Call to communion here on EWTN. Couple lines open at the moment. 833-288. EWTN is our number. 833-288-3986. Let's go to JD now, listening in Amarillo on St. Valentine Catholic Radio. Hello, JD. What's on your mind today?
Hey, guys. Well, first off, I want to thank the Catholic Church for standing up for the unborn babies. They do a great job at that. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. It's an honor to do it.
And but this veneration of Mary, that includes the fact that Mary was born without sin. Where do they get that?
Okay, thanks, JD. I really appreciate the question. So, the veneration of Mary is one thing. Our doctrine that she is immaculately conceived is a separate thing, although they are related. In other words, it would be proper to venerate Mary even if she were not conceived without sin, because Mary is an incredibly eminent and important person who did an incredible good for the human race. Namely, she willingly gave birth to the God-man Jesus in spite of the intense personal suffering that would bring into her life. All right, and Mary did not live a happy life. I mean, she had a really, really rough life.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about getting your betrothed at about 12 and a half years old. You take a vow of virginity. You marry a guy who's a lot older than you. You find out your son is going to be hated by the world. You have to flee to a foreign country and make ends meet while your husband works as a carpenter, kicking yourself because you gave away a bunch of gold, frankincense, and myrrh when you could have made a killing. You watch your child die a death of torture and then live as a contemplative with your nephew for the rest of your days. I mean, she had a tough time of it. Sure. And she signed up for this. When the angel announced to her that she was going to give birth to Christ, her response is, count me in, be it done to me according to thy word. Even though it was no picnic. The Catholics, we don't call her Our Lady of a rocking good time. We call her Our Lady of Sorrows for a reason, all right? And, of course, the Scriptures tell us, Romans chapter 13 in particular tells us that we are to render to everyone what is his due, honor to whom honor. All right, the first act of justice is to render honor to those to whom honor is due. We rightly honor civic heroes. We have a day in the calendar for Martin Luther King Jr.,
Yes.
George Washington, these other great heroes of American culture. We celebrate, noble heroes from war or medicine or what, because of the eminent things they did and the good they did for the human race or the common good. It's right and just for us to venerate and honor them, put up statues and monuments in their honor, in their memory, in Washington, D.C. or on Mount Rushmore or whatever. But not the woman who gave birth to God. Forget about her. Let's put somebody on Mount Rushmore. Let's put Roosevelt on Mount Rushmore, but not the woman who said yes to giving birth to the Messiah who brought about the human race. Well, that strikes me as radically disproportionate. So it's right for us to honor, and all the saints. It's right to honor all the saints. God honors the saints.
Sure.
He honors them by rewarding them with eternal life. If you give even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones because they belong to me, Jesus says, you won't lose your reward. Oh, but if you give birth to the God-man and bring about the salvation of the race, well, nothing for you. I mean, give me a break. Okay, so that's the honor that we give to the Blessed Virgin Mary is proportionate. All right. Now, but in view of that dignity of being made the mother of God, in view of that dignity, God also gave her this supereminent gift. In a way, it's like the gift he gives all of us. He gave her the gift of grace. I can't merit anything from God unless he gives me the grace to do his will. That's what he did for Mary. He gave her the grace to do his will. But she got a super abundant dose of that grace. That's what the angel said. Hail, one having been graced to the full. Kakeratomene in Greek, or full of grace. Hail, full of grace. That's what the angel said to her. Now, Catholic tradition, reflecting on this text, and also informed by oral tradition, which is a bearer of divine revelation, understands that salutation of the angel to mean that Mary had the plenitude of divine grace. She had all the grace you need and all the grace she needed for that incredible job. And what is the end or purpose of grace? Well, it's to preserve us from sin, to remake us in Christ's image and likeness. She had that to an eminent degree. And why? Why was it fitting that she have that kind of grace, even to preserve her from every stain of original sin? Well, if you look at Revelation chapter 12, there's a picture of a woman clothed with the sun, moon, stars and moon under her feet, who gives birth to the child that will rule the nations with a rod of iron. That's the Christ child, of course, who is also described as the mother of all of those who believe in Christ. Mary's divine maternity is not only the physical maternity of Jesus, but we are the body of Christ, the church. So in a real sense, she becomes the mother of the church, all right, and is the church's first and greatest member. Now, I got a lot more to say about the Blessed Virgin, but I hear the music coming, so I'm running out of time.
JD, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. Back in a flash with lots more, including William in Cincinnati. Call to Communion here on EWTN, the Global Catholic Radio Network. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. So, hey, if that's you, give us a call if you've got a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-EWTN. Here's a question now from Sean in Atlanta, listening on The Quest. Sean invited a Muslim man to attend RCIA, and he is indeed attending. So Sean wants to know, do Muslims today descend from Ishmael? And does Genesis 16:12, where it refers to a wild ass of a man, apply to the violence in Islam?
Thank you. Appreciate the question. Well, Muslim is not an ethnic or racial category. It is a religious category. And the largest Muslim countries in the world today by population are not Arabic. So, I mean, Indonesia is, I think, the most populous Muslim country in the world.
So,
the huge proportion of the Muslims in the world are in Southeast Asia. Of course, the Persian Empire became Muslim, and they're Persian, not Arab. So Iran today is, of course, a powerhouse of Muslim identity, but it's not Arab. Of course, all the Turkish nation and all the nations of the former Ottoman Empire that were Islamified are not ethnically Arab, and there are so that's a category mistake, and there are many Arabs that are not Muslim. In fact, until Muhammad, no Arabs were Muslim, and even after the Arabian conquest of Muslim imperialism, they went and conquered formerly Christian nations, and those nations were I don't know what you would call it, Arabicified, right? They became Arabic speaking, and they adopted Arabic culture and language, and to a certain extent Arabic cultural identity without necessarily adopting Islam. So in this country, the United States, most people who identify ethnically as Arabs are not in fact Muslims, but are Middle Eastern Christians of one stripe or another. They may be Maronites or Melkites or Syrian Orthodox or Palestinian Orthodox. About 2/3, I think, of American Arabs are actually Christians of either Orthodox or Catholic Christians in various branches. They're not Muslims. So it's a category mistake to identify Muslim and Arab. Now, it's a mistake a lot of people make because the Arabic language is an important part of the Islamic patrimony, and of course the Quran was written in Arabic, and there are many Muslim believers that think that in order to read the Quran correctly, one must learn Arabic and so forth. And Muhammad, of course, was Arabic speaking, so that's where the identification comes from. There is a pre-Islamic Arabian tradition identifying the biblical character of Ishmael with their own genealogy. That's a legend. I mean, I don't think the genetic DNA evidence is in any way demonstrative on that. That tradition is not particularly important to Christian understanding of Islam or of Arabia, and of course, Muhammad is not anticipated or mentioned in any respect in the Hebrew or Christian scriptures. I mean, Muhammad came in the 7th century, and these were written hundreds of thousands of years before that. So. I understand that identification is in the Arabic and Muslim mind. I don't know that it's substantiated either by the genealogical or biblical evidence.
All right, very good. Hey, Sean, thank you so much for calling, and thanks for reaching out to your Muslim friend there and inviting him to check out the RCIA program. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. We're going to go now to William in Cincinnati, listening on the great Sacred Heart Radio. Hey, William, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Dr. Anders, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine. How about you?
All right, thanks. I'm going to state my question. I'll get off of here. My question concerns when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he was praying to God to take this cup from him, be it God's will, not his own. I think the key word there is will. And we know that since God did not take that away from him, it must have been God's will to have Jesus crucified. That having been said, I think we can only intelligently surmise then that all the events leading up to the crucifixion must also have been God's will, including Judas's betrayal and Pilate's condemnation. So my question is simply this. That having been said, how can Judas or Pontius Pilate be in any way, shape, or form held accountable negatively for bringing about the event that was God's own will? I'll hang up and let you respond. Thanks.
Thanks, William. The problem that you raised with respect to Judas and Pilate is the same problem that you would have dealing with moral responsibility of any human person. If I get up in the morning and fail to say my prayers, which I ought to do, right? I ought to say my prayers. It's my moral duty to do so. But if I neglect that obligation, I have freely chosen to neglect that obligation. That act falls within the scope of God's providence. There are no accidents in human history. Jesus said, not a sparrow falls apart from the will, the intention of God the Father. God does not sit on the edge of his seat, so to speak, chewing his fingernails, waiting to see how things will unfold. In fact, every free human action falls within the scope of divine providence. And there's no incompatibility between the idea of humans having free will to be actually deliberate between ends and choose one versus the other and to be morally responsible, and God having orchestrated the outcome of that free choice. Those are not conflicting priorities, all right, not conflicting concepts. Yes, God's predestination includes the predestination of free human actions. God determines the outcome of free human actions, not in a way that overrides our personal agency, but in a way that incorporates and includes our personal agencies so that we still have moral responsibility. And we really have freely chosen. And you say, well, I can't wrap my head around that. Let me give you just an analogy, okay? As a parent, any parent knows this, there are plenty of occasions when you have your kid in a situation where you can nigh unto infallibly predict the outcome of your child's choice. And you know what the choice is going to be. And you might choose, under a certain set of circumstance, to allow your child to make a choice that you know is objectively wrong because you intend to bring out of that particular act a greater good. Maybe the greater good is that the child learned from his mistakes, for instance. You could have prevented it. You infallibly knew the outcome, and you put the kid in the situation. Now, we don't have the same scope of control or providence that God does, but that's enough of and yet we also know that the child has his own agency and really did freely choose to act in that particular way and is responsible for his actions. But if we've done our job properly, then the good is going to come out of that we desire, and the kid's going to learn, or, he'll, whatever, right? Whatever outcome we're looking for. More so God.
Yeah. William, thank you so much for your call. Glad that you're listening to us via Sacred Heart Radio. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Carla now in Necedah, Wisconsin, checking us out on EWTN television. Hey, Carla, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. By the way, I'm a lifelong Catholic. Went to Catholic school. I'm 79 years old. I went to Catholic schools for my whole school, from kindergarten to 12, except for a year and a half in public. My question is, I have some friends, and I use the term who are very anti-Catholic, Baptist, and we had many arguments. I had to wound up defending the Catholic faith, the Pope, and Mary in particular, who he didn't seem to be considered very important. One of the things I'm asking about is, he said there is no mention of purgatory, but I know I have come across, he was one of these that could quote scripture and verse, by the way, that didn't necessarily live by it. My question is, where's my pen? Where in the Bible would it mention, Cranky, quit digging your claws into me.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I have a cat and I have a dog, my best friend, by the way, who died 2 years ago. She also was Baptist, but she had a deep devotion to Mary. I gave her a rosary, and when she would say her prayers, many times she would hold that rosary in her hand.
Oh.
So, Carla, let me get, your question is, where is purgatory in the Bible? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And what's your cat's name?
My friend called her baby. Even the veterinarian now has her as Cranky Baby.
Cranky Baby.
Cranky
I love
Baby.
it. I had to take note because I think it's the first time we've had a cat on Catholic radio, right?
That's
I got to
okay.
remember Cranky
That's
Baby.
all
Thank
right.
you. My wife's a big dog person, but I think she'll still get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
I'll tell her about it. So, all right, I'm going to tell you where purgatory is in the Bible. But before I do, I want to arm you with some ammunition, all right? Because what you just told me was that your anti-Catholic friends are coming at you, and they're attacking and attacking and attacking and attacking. Attacking this Catholic belief, attacking that Catholic belief, and you feel like you have to defend. Okay? Well, the best defense is a good offense. So rather than just play defense the whole time, I want to give you some ammunition, and it's going to come back on this purgatory thing, but I want to change the way you're thinking about the question for just a second. Here's how I want to change it. If I had your friend with me, and they said, Dr. Anders, where is purgatory in the Bible? This is what I would say. I would say, I'm going to answer that question. But before I do, let me ask you a question. What difference does it make? Do you think that all Christian beliefs must be based on a text of the Bible? Now, they're going to say, well, yes, of course. Yes, all Christian beliefs have to be based on a text of the Bible. And I will say, oh, okay. Where is that Christian belief stated in the Bible? You see what I'm saying? You have this idea that a Christian doctrine must be based on the Bible. Well, that's a belief. That's a doctrinal statement. Where is that in the Bible? It's nowhere in the Bible. The Bible never says that all our beliefs have to be based on the Bible. On the contrary, the Bible tells us that if we want to know what the faith is, we have to pay attention not to the Bible alone, but to sacred tradition and to the teaching of the church. So in 1 Corinthians, for example, St. Paul says, "The tradition I received from the Lord, I hand on to you." And he's talking about oral tradition. When Jesus commissioned the apostles in Matthew 28, he didn't say, "Go into all nations and preach the Bible." It doesn't say that. He says, "Go into all nations and preach everything I commanded you." Everything Christ commanded was oral. He didn't write anything down.
Right.
Then he says, "I'll be with you to the end of the age, and whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven." So he gives that charge to the apostles, to the teaching office of the church, not to a book. So there are a lot of things that your Protestant friends believe that are not in the Bible. One of them is they don't even know what the Bible is. They don't even know what books belong in the Bible. And they can't answer that question about what books belong in the Bible by pointing to the Bible, because the Bible doesn't include its own table of contents. The table of contents, of course, is a summary of what men have said needs to go in the Bible. But there's no inspired text given to us by God that says, here's what you have to put in the Bible. So the very act of pointing at a Bible is simultaneously pointing to the authority of sacred tradition. And every Baptist who points to the Bible to attack the Catholic Church is proving the authority of the Catholic Church to list the proper biblical books. The very point of using the Bible has to go back to Catholic tradition to get the Bible. All right. So I want to throw that out there. I want you to lead with that. Rather than I'm going to show you purgatory in the Bible, I want you to lead with how do you even know that things have to be based on the Bible? And I guarantee you they won't answer with reference to the Bible. They'll answer with an argument, but it won't come from a biblical text. Okay? Or if it does, it'll be a biblical text twisted so completely out of shape as to be meaningless. Now let's talk about purgatory in the Bible. Okay? In St. Paul's second letter to Timothy, chapter 1, verse 18, he prays for a dead friend. He prays for a dead friend. What's he doing praying for a dead friend? Well, go back and look at 2 Maccabees, chapter 12, and you'll find out that the Israelites prayed for the dead. Now, I know what your friend is going to say. He's going to say, I don't think 2 Maccabees ought to be in the Bible. Aha! You see? You can't get away from the question of tradition. You don't even know what books belong in the Bible. But in my Bible, 2 Maccabees chapter 12 shows us praying for the dead.
Yep.
Well, you don't pray for dead people in heaven. They don't need it. You don't pray for dead people in hell. They're not going to benefit from it. You only pray for those who can benefit from the prayers of the church. That is, those that are in some kind of intermediate state with respect to God's judgment. So that's point number one. I'll give you another point. If you look at 2 Samuel chapter 12 and 2 Samuel chapter 24, you will find that God forgives King David for his sin and then imposes a penance on him. You know what penance is. You go to confession, you confess your sins, the priest forgives you, then gives you a penance. All right? God forgives David and gives him a penance. Why do I point this out? Because to be forgiven for your sin does not eliminate the need to do penance. Purgatory is where we do penance if we have not done sufficient penance in this life. That we must do penance is a biblical doctrine. There it is. I showed you two texts. You get that job done in purgatory if you don't get it done in this life. All right? Finally, Psalm 24 and Matthew 25 both teach that without purity of heart, we will not see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, Jesus says, for they will see God. Psalm 24 says, who can ascend the Lord's mountain or stand on his holy hill? Only he who has clean hands and a pure heart. How do we achieve purity of heart? St. Paul says, Romans chapter 8, we can do so only through the experience of suffering. We will reign with him in glory, says Paul, if we also suffer with him. Purgatory is also an opportunity to acquire purity of heart by becoming successively, progressively detached from sin if we are not so purified in this life. So we infer the doctrine of purgatory from the practice of praying for the dead, from the need to do penance, and from the need for purity of heart, all of which are biblical doctrines. The word purgatory is not mentioned, neither is the word Trinity. Now, there are a whole host of words, theological terms that your Baptist friends use. But the reality, the concept, and the logic of purgatory is there. That's the Bible. Add to that the weight of sacred tradition, where the word purgatory is used and explicitly taught. Add to that the weight of the teaching office of the church, to whom Christ said, "What you bind on earth is bound in heaven. The gates of hell will not prevail." From Scripture, from tradition, and from the church's teaching office, three sources of divine revelation all teach infallibly and clearly the existence of purgatory.
There you go, Carla. Appreciate your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. By the way, that was a lot of information there. If you want to catch the podcast, you can do that by going to EWTNradio.net, EWTNradio.net. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Hey, do you know what a media missionary is? Well, I can answer that question. Think about that time that you walked into your church and there's a rack with a whole lot of newspapers, the National Catholic Register, or maybe you saw some EWTN program guides, or maybe some window stickers. You know, those things don't just show up. They're not, they don't just go, blip, there they are. Nope, those are put there by EWTN media missionaries. Now, if you'd like to know how to join this happy group, visit EWTNmissionaries.com today, EWTNmissionaries.com. Join us in sharing the eternal word with the world. Back to the phones right now, and here is Bob in Rapid City, South Dakota, listening on Real Presence Radio. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hi, and thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I am a recovering Baptist struggling on a multi-year journey where I find myself getting closer and closer to converting to Catholicism.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things I struggle with is the idea that everything's already figured out, that we know everything, and there's no mystery. And one of the things particularly I'm struggling with is I'm on this journey, I've become a universalist as far as reconciliation is concerned. And I read of Pope John Paul II saying that atheists can be in heaven, and the recent, Pope Francis told that child, his atheist father with the father's heart, could be in heaven. And I'm curious about how much room there is for theological freedom or freedom of thought on certain doctrines like that if I were to become a Catholic.
Let me ask you, I'm going to answer the question, but I want to ask you one first just to get my head wrapped around your issue. Are you a universalist or an inclusivist? Because the positions that you just articulated from Pope John Paul and others, those are positions consistent with the kind of Christian inclusivism. It's not the same thing. To say that an atheist can be saved is not the same thing as saying that all atheists necessarily will be saved, and, we've got a Porsche and a Jaguar for Hitler up there. Mm-hmm. All right, you understand the distinction I'm making? Are you an inclusivist or are you a universalist?
I think right now I'm a universalist.
So that all rational and sentient beings are necessarily saved regardless of the moral quality of their life or their contrition.
That's where I find myself right now.
Okay, so I want to bracket that for a second. Now let's come to your main point, which is about how much theological freedom of movement do we have within the Catholic tradition. There is a document that sounds like you're a thinking kind of guy, this might float your boat a little bit. From 1972, the International Theological Commission. The International Theological Commission is not an organ of the magisterium per se. Like what it says is not magisterial teaching, all right? But it is commissioned by the Pope to examine theological questions by experts recognized by the Vatican for their intellectual acumen and fidelity to Catholic tradition. So it's a very helpful guide for the science of theology, right? More than specifically for Christian doctrine, if that distinction makes sense to you. And the document I want you to look at from the International Theological Commission is called Unity of the Faith and Theological Pluralism. All right, and it is a rather lengthy and sophisticated answer to the question that you're giving, all right? Unity of the faith and theological pluralism, about how much room is there for theological pluralism consistent with the idea of there being one faith to which we all adhere. Two other documents I'd like you to look at are the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, commentary on the Professio Fidei, the profession of faith. Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was prefect of the CDF, was responsible for the production of this document, and it gets into precisely what does it mean to profess faith in the Catholic Church, and how does that square with degrees of magisterial teaching and authority. And the final document I'd like you to look at is called, I believe it's Donum Veritatis, the Gift of Truth, and it is on the ecclesial vocation of a theologian. Donum Veritatis, on the ecclesial vocation of the theologian, and it looks at what is the right and duty of a theologian, someone whose job is scientific reflection on the data of revelation, all right, in fidelity to the Catholic Church, and in particular, it examines the question of what happens when a Catholic theologian who intends fidelity to the Church and its teachings finds that there is either a deficit in the way a doctrine has been explained or a deficit in his understanding so that he cannot rationally and coherently make an act of faith in the formulation of a dogma as it is presented to him. Like, what is his subjective stance supposed to be in respect of that dogma? How does he think about it? How does he intellectualize it? How does he assent to it? And I'm pointing you to these texts because their answers are not banal, they're not shallow, they're complex. And since this is a complex issue that you're asking, I want you to get authoritative guidance. Now, finally, I want to give you a kind of a methodological primer. All right, if you look at St. Thomas Aquinas, who is the model for all Catholic theologians, he's the Doctor Angelicus, he is the common doctor of the Church. Thomas has a saying. He says, when faced with a contradiction, draw a distinction. I find that tremendously helpful.
It is.
You'll find that he almost never says yes or no. He'll say, yes, in this respect. No, in that respect. And you can do that all day long. You can do that all day long. And our job as theologians is to try to bring clarity and understanding to a mystery, and we can do so by endlessly elaborating distinctions, right? Now, with respect to the specific issue that you're wrestling with, which is, universalism versus perhaps a kind of broad inclusivism, there are a couple things that are entailed by your belief in universalism. One of them would be, in your belief, God has to do violence to the human will because it's incoherent to speak about people being in union with God in the beatific vision in charity, all right, against their will. And there's no other way that we're alienated from God other than freely choosing to reject him. So for a man to be saved means that his will adheres to God. But it is precisely the nature of a will to have the power of deliberation. Could God bring it about that all people freely chose to love him? Yes. Has he in fact done so? Open question, and you're overstating the evidence to hold that as a dogmatic belief.
Mike, thank you for your call. We'll see you tomorrow here on Call to Communion. God bless.